Hi, grade 10. So I'm back with chapter 8 of book 2, and this is entitled Monsignor in the Country. I know Teacher Ong did Monsignor in the town, so you've met him. And now I'm doing Monsignor in the Country. Okay, this is actually one of my favorite chapters actually. There's not much like action or whatever, but I really like the introduction of this character. Okay. So let's begin with Monsignor in the Country. A beautiful landscape, with the corn bright in it, but not abundant. Patches of poor rye where corn should have been, patches of poor peas and beans, patches of most coarse vegetable substitutes for wheat. On inanimate nature, as on the men and women who cultivated it, a prevalent tendency towards the appearance of vegetating unwillingly, a dejected disposition to give up and wither away. So the country, which is a farmland, had very poor vegetation already, and everything kind of felt it had an air of giving up or something like that. Okay, so it was not a lush farmland. It was not in good, it was not in good condition. Monsignor the Marquis, in his travelling carriage, which might have been lighter, conducted by 4 post horses and 2 postilions, packed up a steep hill. A blush on the countenance of Monsignor the Marquis was no impeachment of his high breeding. It was not far from within. It was occasioned by an external circumstance beyond his control, the setting sun. The sunset struck so brilliantly into the travelling carriage when it gained the hilltop that its occupant was steeped in crimson. "It will die out," said Monsieur the Marquis, glancing at his hands, "directly." In effect, the sun was so low that it dipped at the moment. When the heavy drag had been adjusted to the wheel and the carriage slid downhill, with a cinderous smell, in a cloud of dust, the red glow departed quickly. The sun and the Marquis going down together, there was no glow left when the drag was taken off. But there remained a broken country, bold and open. A little village at the bottom of the hill, a broad sweep and rise beyond it, church tower, a windmill, a forest for the chase, and a crag with a fortress on it used as a prison. Oh man. So there was it. Never mind. Round upon all these darkening objects as the night drew on, the Marquis looked, with the air of one who was coming near home. So after the hill, after the Marquis kind of went up the hill, when he went down, there was a town. Okay, there was a little town, and on the crag of the hill, there was a fortress which was made into a prison. So it's very strange that a single small town was in need of a fortified jail. Okay, so I always thought that was a little bit off. Okay, the village had its one poor street with its poor brewery, poor tannery, poor tavern, poor stable yard, poor relays of post horses, poor fountain, all usual poor appointments. It had its poor people too. All its people were poor, and many of them were sitting at the doors, shredding spare onions and the like for supper, while many were at the fountain, washing leaves and grasses, and any such small yieldings of the earth that could be eaten. Expressive sips of what made them poor were not wanting. The tax for the state, tax for the church, the tax for the Lord, tax local and tax general were to be paid here and to be paid there, according to solemn inscription in the little village, until the wonder was that there was any village left unswallowed. So the reason why the village was particularly poor was that they were heavily taxed. Like it seemed like everything had a tax, and they were very destitute. Few children were to be seen, and no dogs. Why do you think there were no dogs? As to the men and women, their choice on earth was stated in the prospect. Life on the lowest terms that could sustain it, down in the little village under the mill, or captivity, and death in the dominant prison on the crag. Heralded by a courier in advance and by the cracking of his postilion's whip, which twined snake-like about their heads in the evening air, as if he came attended by the Furies, Monsieur de Marquis drew up in his travelling carriage at the posting-house gate. It was hard by the fountain, and the peasants suspended their operations to look at him. He looked at them and saw in them, without knowing it, the slow sure filing down of misery-worn face and figure that was to make the meagreness of Frenchmen and English superstition which should survive the truth through the best part of 100 years. Monsieur de Marquis cast his eyes over the submissive faces that drooped before him as the like of himself had drooped before Monseigneur of the Court. Only the difference was that these faces drooped merely to suffer and not to propitiate. When a grizzled mender of the roads joined the group, so there was a character called the mender of the roads. "Bring me hither that fellow," said the Marquis to the courier. The fellow was brought, cap in hand, and the other fellows close round to look and listen, in the manner of the people at the Paris fountain. "I passed you on the road." "Monseigneur, it is true I had the honor of being passed on the road." "Coming up the hill, and at the top of the hill, both?" "Monseigneur, it is true." "What did you look at so fixedly?" Allah! So the mender of the road, so Monsieur de Marquis was like, "Diba I saw you when I was in my carriage riding here, and you were staring so hard at my carriage. What were you looking at?" "Monseigneur, I looked at the man." He stooped a little, and with his tattered blue cap pointed under the carriage. All his fellows stooped to look under the carriage. "What man, pig? And why look there?" "Pardon, Monseigneur, he swung by the chain of the shoe, the drag." "Who?" demanded the traveler. "Monseigneur, the man." "May the devil carry away these idiots! How do you call the man? You knew all the men of this part of the town. Who was he?" "Your clemency, Monseigneur, he was not of this part of the country. Of all the days of my life I never saw him." "Swinging by the chain? To be suffocated?" "With your gracious permission, that was the wonder of it, Monseigneur. His head was hanging over, like this." He turned himself sideways to the carriage and leaned back with his face thrown up to the sky and head hanging down, then recovered himself, fumbled with his cap, and made a bow. So again, the mender of the roads is making a performance. Diba we met him? We already met him before. So now he's kind of doing his thing again. What was he like? Monseigneur, he was whiter than the miller, all covered with dust, white as a spectre, tall as a spectre. So he was white because of the dust, and he was characteristically tall. The picture produced an immense sensation in the little crowd, but all eyes, without comparing notes with other eyes, looked at Monsieur de Marquis, perhaps to observe whether he had any spectre on his conscience. "Truly, you did well," said the Marquis, felicitously, sensible that such vermin were not to ruffle him. "To see a thief accompanying my carriage, and not to open that great mouth of yours. Bah! Put him aside, Monsieur Gabelle." Monsieur Gabelle was the postmaster, and some other taxing functionary united. He had come out with great obsequiousness to assist at this examination, and he held the examined by the drapery of his arm in an official manner. "Bah! Go aside," said Monsieur Gabelle. "Lay hands on this stranger if he seeks to lodge in your village tonight, and be sure that his business is honest, Gabelle." "Monseigneur, I am flattered to devote myself to your orders." Sip-sip kayo ni si Gabelle gyud. Super sip-sip forever. "Did he run away, fellow? Where is that accursed?" The accursed was already under the carriage with some half-dozen particular friends, pointing out the chain with his blue cap. Some half-dozen other particular friends promptly hauled him out and presented him breathless to Monsieur de Marquis. "Did the man run away, dolt, when we stopped for the drag?" "Monseigneur, he precipitated himself over the hillside head first, as a person plunges into the river. So he jumped and he dove head first." "See to it, Gabelle. Go on." So I think Monsieur de Marquis wanted proof that this really happened, that he really dove head first wherever the mender of the road said. The half-dozen who were peering at the chain were still among the wheels like sheep. The wheels turned so suddenly that they were lucky to save their skins and bones. They had very little else to save, or they might not have been so fortunate. The burst with which the carriage started out of the village and up the rise beyond was soon checked by the steepness of the hill. Gradually it subsided to a foot pace, swinging and lumbering upward among the many sweet scents of a summer night. The postilions, with 1,000 gossamer gnats circling about them in lieu of the furies, quietly mended the points to the lashes of their whips. The valet walked by the horses, the courier was audible, trotting on ahead to the dun distance. At the steepest point of the hill there was a little burial ground where Hmm. Anyway, I just realized something. Okay. At the steepest point of the hill there was a little burial ground with a cross and a new large figure of our Saviour on it. It was a poor figure in wood, done by some inexperienced rustic carver, but he had studied the figure from life, his own life maybe, for it was dreadfully spare and thin, so even the statues of the graveyard were already thin, because that is what they were used to already. To this distressful emblem of a great distress that had long been growing worse, and was not at its worst, a woman was kneeling. She turned her head as the carriage came up to her, rose quickly, and presented herself at the carriage door. "It is you, Monseigneur, Monseigneur, a petition." With an exclamation of impatience, but with his unchangeable face, Monseigneur looked out. "How then? What is it?" "Always petitions." "Monseigneur, for the love of the great God, my husband, the forester—" "What of your husband, the forester?" "Always the same with you people. Cannot pay something?" "He has paid all, Monseigneur. He is dead." "Well, he is quiet. Can I restore him to you?" "Alas, no, Monseigneur, but he lies yonder, under a little heap of poor grass." "Well?" "Monseigneur, there are so many little heaps of poor grass." Again, well, so meaning there are lots of heaps of poor grass, so meaning daghan na kaayo og namatay there and buried there. She looked an old woman, but was young. Her manner was one of passionate grief. By turns she clasped her veinous and knotted hands together with wild energy, and laid one of them on the carriage door, tenderly, caressingly, as if it had been a human breast, and could be expected to feel the appealing touch. "Monseigneur, hear me! Monseigneur, hear my petition! My husband died of want, so many die of want, and so many more will die of want." Again, well, can I feed them? "Monseigneur, the good God knows. But I don't ask it. My petition is that a morsel of stone or wood with my husband's name may be placed over him to show where he lies. Otherwise the place will be quickly forgotten. It will never be found when I am dead of the same malady. I shall be laid under some other heap of poor grass. Monseigneur, there are so many, they increase so fast, there is so much want. Monseigneur, Monseigneur." The valet had put her away from the door. "Man, gitukmod pagyod." The carriage had broken into a brisk trot, the postilions had quickened the pace, she was left far behind. And Monseigneur, again escorted by the Furies, was rapidly diminishing the league or two of distance that remained between him and his chateau. The sweet scent of summer night rose. Pastusa, oy, so they pushed the lady and then he yawed towards his chateau. The sweet scents of summer nights rose all around him, and rose as the rain falls impartially on the dusty, ragged, and toil-worn group at the fountain not far away, to whom the mender of the roads, with the aid of his blue cap, without which he was nothing, still enlarged upon his man like a spectre as long as they could bear it. By degree, as they could bear no more, they dropped off one by one, and lights twinkled in little casements, which lights, as the casements darkened and more stars came out, seemed to have shot up in the sky instead of having been extinguished. The shadow of the large, high-roofed house, and of many overhanging trees, was upon Monseigneur the Marquis by that time. Monsieur the Marquis by that time, and the shadow was exchanged for the light of the flambeau, as his carriage stopped, and the great door of the chateau was opened to him. "Monsieur Charles." Dun, dun, dun! Who is Charles? "Monsieur Charles, whom I expect." "Is he arrived from England?" We only know one Charles who is currently living in England, and that is Charles Darnay. So Monsieur de Marquis was like, "Is Charles here from England?" The plot is starting to thicken. Monseigneur, not yet. So Charles has not yet arrived. Ah! Okay, the next is Gorgon's Head. Oh my, this is really one of my favorite chapters, Gorgon's Head, but it will go to Ing Ong, which he does more special effects, so he will enjoy that a lot with him. I get two promises. Okay, I get two promises. I get two promises. So that's chapter 10. Okay, I'm happy. I like two promises. And what else do I get? Two promises. Okay, I want fellow of yes, I get fellow of no of delicacy. Okay, by grade 10, that was a short chapter. I really enjoyed reading it out loud for you. Bye.